I am Emma Foster, 38 years old, a wildlife researcher specializing in animal behavior in extreme conditions. I spent 2 years living and working in a small cabin in the wilderness of Alaska, about a 4-hour drive from the nearest town. My work required complete isolation from the outside world to observe and record the natural activities of animals without disturbing them. The silence and cold here were sometimes terrifying, but I had grown accustomed to it and found joy in studying these resilient yet fragile creatures. I woke in the middle of the night to a strange sound. The familiar howling of the wind around the cabin was interspersed with another noise, faint, intermittent like the growl of a large animal. I sat up in bed, holding my breath as I listened. The sound came again, clearer and longer this time. Something felt wrong. In temperatures as low as -40 degrees Celsius, any creature would seek deep shelter to survive. Yet now, outside my cabin, it seemed like something was struggling to stay alive. I quickly threw on my thick fur coat, grabbed a flashlight, and moved toward the window. The layer of snow on the glass was too thick, so I wiped it off with my hand to get a better view. The beam of my flashlight illuminated only a small patch of space in the blinding white storm. The swirling snowflakes in the wind looked like shards of knives slicing through the light. I strained my eyes to see something in the darkness. Then I saw it, a large shadow moving slowly, followed by two smaller ones. My heart pounded. Bears! I was certain it was a mother bear and her two cubs. But why were they here in the middle of winter? I knew full well that bears were supposed to be hibernating in their dens. Something terrible must have driven them out of their safe haven. They were staggering toward my cabin, each step heavy as if every movement was a battle. The wind howled harder, shaking the window panes. I could see the mother bear struggling to drag her two cubs through the deep snow, her body clearly exhausted. One of the cubs stumbled and fell, and the mother lowered her nose to nudge it back up. I held my breath as I watched. The two cubs trembled violently, their fur frozen into clumps of ice. The large mother bear was no better off, each of her steps seeming as heavy as 1,000 pounds. Watching the scene, I couldn't help but feel my heart tighten. But I also understood the danger I could face if the mother bear felt threatened. Bears are powerful and aggressive when protecting their young. I had read and studied countless cases of dangerous encounters between humans and bears. But in this moment, there was no aggression in the mother bear's eyes. Instead, I saw exhaustion, desperation, and a faint glimmer of hope as she looked toward my cabin. I stood frozen by the window, trying to think clearly. The first rule of living in the wilderness is never to interfere with nature. But could I turn away while watching them die right before my eyes? The storm outside was so fierce that I felt the cold seeping through the wooden walls of the cabin. Out there, the cold wasn't just an enemy, it was death itself. I returned to my bed, trying to calm myself, but the faint growls of the mother bear echoed in my mind. I looked at the clock. It was only midnight. The storm would last at least another 12 hours, and I was certain that if I did nothing, the bear family wouldn't survive. But I also knew that one small mistake could make me the next victim of this harsh wilderness. I slumped down by the window, staring at the faint figures in the snow. The mother bear had stopped moving, just standing there with her two cubs curled up beside her. I had never felt so helpless in my life. What could I do? What could I do to save them without making everything worse? The answer wasn't clear, but deep down, I knew I couldn't stand by and watch them perish. I had to do something. I had to try. I stood silently by the window for a long time, my eyes fixed on the image of the bear family struggling in the storm. The cold outside sent a shiver down my spine, but I knew that for them, the chill was more than discomfort. It was a death sentence looming near. I took a deep breath, grabbed a flashlight, and walked toward the front door. This time, I needed a closer look. As I cracked the door open, an icy blast of air rushed in, numbing my skin within seconds. I raised the flashlight, its beam piercing through the thick snow and landing on three blurred figures. The mother bear stood there, bulky yet frail. Her two cubs were curled tightly at her feet, seemingly too weak to move. The beam startled her, and she lifted her head to look straight at me. In her eyes, I didn't see the usual ferocity of a wild bear. Instead, there was weariness, desperation, a silent plea for help. I slowly stepped back and shut the door. Standing inside the warmth of the cabin, I felt my heart pounding, not from fear, but from a deep sense of helplessness. I couldn't ignore those eyes, but I also couldn't risk stepping outside without a plan. I turned back to my desk, where stacks of notebooks filled with 2 years' worth of animal behavior research lay scattered. I had written extensively about the laws of nature, where life and death play out on their own terms, free from human interference. But tonight, those theories suddenly felt meaningless. I recalled a similar case I'd read about not long ago. A researcher in Siberia had once saved a wolf trapped in the ice, only to face backlash from the scientific community for violating the principle of non-intervention in nature. I understood the reasoning behind those principles, but at this moment, they only amplified my inner turmoil. I returned to the window and looked outside. One of the cubs was now motionless, deaf, showing no signs of life. The mother bear nudged its small body with her nose, but it didn't stir. My heart ached. If I did nothing, they would die, and this image would haunt me forever. I turned on the emergency radio, searching for updates on the storm. The blizzard is expected to continue for at least another 12 hours, a steady voice reported through the small speaker. I clenched my fists, feeling the weight of time slipping away. This storm would leave no chance for the bear family if I just stood by. I began searching the cabin for anything that might help me approach them safely. A thick blanket, a few old bed sheets, and a small portable heater, all were placed on the table. My initial idea was to open the storage shed adjacent to the cabin, where I kept my research equipment. That room was well insulated and separate from my living space. If I could guide the bear family there, they might have a chance to survive. However, approaching them would be far from simple. The mother bear could feel threatened at any moment. I knew all too well that a bear, even one weakened by exhaustion, could inflict serious injuries if she felt the need to protect her cubs. I needed a clear plan and careful execution. Standing at the door with the blanket and flashlight in hand, my heart raced. I didn't know if this plan would work, but I had no other choice. I cracked the door open again, the freezing wind slapping my face as a harsh reminder of the merciless cold outside. The flashlight beam found the bear family once more. The mother bear watched me, her eyes still wary but showing no aggression. I carefully knelt down, gently placing the blanket on the thick snow, leaving it at a distance that wouldn't alarm her. I tried to keep my voice as soft as possible, though I knew she wouldn't understand my words. "It's okay. I just want to help." The mother bear didn't move, but she didn't take her eyes off me either. Slowly, I backed away into the cabin, leaving the blanket on the snow, hoping she would understand. For the first time, I felt a fragile flicker of hope. I returned to the window and waited in silence. The wind howled through the cracks, and the temperature continued to drop. I could feel the tension in the air, as though everything hung precariously on a thin thread between life and death. Then I saw the mother bear lower her head and pull the blanket toward her cubs. A small movement, but enough to bring tears to my eyes. Perhaps she had understood that I wasn't her enemy. I sat down on the cabin floor, leaning against the door, my mind overwhelmed with chaotic thoughts. I had stepped outside and laid down the blanket, a risky act I never imagined myself doing. But it wasn't enough. The mother bear needed more than that to save her 2 cubs. I couldn't just stand by and watch them slowly die in this terrible cold. Everything I had learned about nature, about respecting its laws, seemed meaningless now. In my head, the voice of reason clashed constantly with compassion. One part of me insisted, "Don't interfere. This is the law of survival. Nature knows how to balance itself." But another part of me, the stronger, more emotional part, screamed, "Do something, or they'll die." I looked up at the photo hanging on the wall, one I had taken of a bear family during my first trip to Alaska. The mother bear in the picture looked strong, confident, leading her cubs across a frozen river. But now, in front of me, was an exhausted bear family, the mother's strength nearly depleted as she struggled to protect her young. I couldn't bear the thought of them not surviving the night. I stood up and began gathering the necessities for the next step of my plan. The storage room next to the cabin, though small, was the only place I could bring the bear family to shelter them from the storm. I needed to prepare it thoroughly to ensure the mother bear and her cubs could survive the night without endangering myself. I took my time, checking all the equipment again. First, I raised the temperature in the storage room, turning the heater to its highest setting to create a warm environment. Then, I inspected the windows and doors to make sure they were secure. I had no idea what would happen if the mother bear panicked or attacked. This storage room had to be safe for all three parties. The plan was clear, but the fear wouldn't stop knocking at my mind. What if the mother bear felt threatened? What if I couldn't control the situation? I tried to push those thoughts aside and focus on the task I had made up my mind, and there was no turning back. The clock on the wall showed 1 a.m. I took a deep breath and looked out the window. The mother bear was still there, almost motionless, with her 2 cubs curled up at her feet. I grabbed the flashlight and a few more blankets, this time determined to take it further. I opened the door and stepped outside, the biting cold slicing through my skin. I crouched low, moving slowly toward the bear family. The beam of the flashlight made the mother bear lift her head to look at me. Her eyes were still full of caution, but perhaps due to exhaustion, she neither moved nor growled as I had feared. I stopped a few meters away from her, placing the blankets on the ground, keeping my voice as soft as possible. "It's okay. I won't hurt you," I whispered. Even though I knew the bears couldn't understand human speech, I felt that saying something reassuring might ease the tension in the air. The mother bear didn't react, her eyes shifting from me to the blankets. I stepped back, maintaining a safe distance, giving her time to decide. After a moment, I saw the mother bear lower her head, bite a corner of the blanket, and pull it toward her cubs. That action felt like silent acceptance. I felt a wave of relief, but the work was far from over. I needed to bring them into the storage room. I went back to the cabin and opened the door to the storage room, letting the warmth spill out as an invitation. Grabbing another blanket, I stepped outside again. This time, I laid the blanket out in a trail leading from where the mother bear was lying to the storage room door. I stood back, watching her every move. The mother bear looked at the blanket spread across the snow, then turned to her cubs. A faint whimper escaped her throat, a gentle nudge of encouragement. The first cub staggered to its feet, clinging to its mother's leg. The second cub remained motionless. The mother bear leaned down, nudging the still cub with her nose, but this time it didn't have the strength to respond. My heart ached as I watched the mother bear strain to lift her small cub, her body clearly drained of energy. With her last bit of strength, she bit down on the blanket and began dragging both cubs across the snow. Each step was slow, but her determination never wavered. I stood frozen, not daring to move, fearing any action might worsen the situation. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the mother bear managed to pull her 2 cubs near the storage room door. I held the door open, stepping back to avoid scaring her. She paused at the entrance, turning to look at me one last time, as if to ensure this was a safe place. Then, with all the strength she had left, she stepped inside, pulling her 2 cubs behind her. I shut the storage room door and leaned against the wall, my entire body trembling, not from the cold, but from the tension. I had done it. The first step was complete. Now all I could do was hope that the warmth of the room would save this bear family. I stood panting by the door of the storage room, my entire body still trembling. The light from the heater inside the room spilled out through the small glass window, casting a faint glow amidst the endless white snowstorm. I pressed my hand against the glass, trying to see inside. The mother bear had lain down on the floor, her massive body curled protectively around her 2 cubs like an invisible windbreak. The 3 of them looked as if they were sleeping, but I knew it was only sheer exhaustion after a brutal fight for survival. I returned to the cabin, collapsing into a chair, my heart still racing. I had just brought a bear family into the storage room, a move that broke every rule I'd adhered to throughout my career. Every survival guide warns, never let wildlife come close, but I had invited them right to my doorstep. The thought left me conflicted, but then I recalled the look in the mother bear's eyes as she entered. It wasn't the gaze of a predator, it was the gaze of a desperate mother. The relentless howl of the wind outside reminded me that the storm was still raging violently. I glanced at the clock. It was nearly 3 a.m. The sky outside remained pitch black, and the temperature continued to plummet. I decided to stay near the storage room to keep an eye on the situation. I brought a chair close to the small window that connected the cabin to the storage room, then sat down, my eyes fixed on the bear family inside. Through the fogged glass, I saw one of the cubs begin to stir. It tried to push itself up, but its tiny legs were too weak to lift its body. The mother bear gently nudged it with her nose, encouraging it. The other cub remained motionless, but its faint breaths told me it was still alive. I bit my lip, hoping the warmth in the room would help them recover. About an hour later, one of the cubs began moving more. It wobbled to its feet, then crawled back into its mother's embrace, seeking safety and warmth. The mother bear remained still, but I noticed her ears twitching slightly, as if she were listening to everything around her. I guess she was wary of me. No matter how exhausted she was, her instinct to protect her cubs hadn't waned. To avoid frightening the bear family, I decided to place water and some dry food in the far corner of the storage room. I prepared a small tray of warm water and a few pieces of frozen meat, then carefully opened the door to the storage room. The mother bear immediately lifted her head, her gaze sharper than before. I froze, raising both hands to show I meant no harm. "It's okay, I'll leave the food here," I whispered. Then I backed away, closing the door without making a sound. Back in the cabin, I sat down, my eyes glued to the glass window. The mother bear didn't rush to eat. She stared at the tray of food for a long time before lowering her head to sniff each item. Once she was sure there was no danger, she pushed the water tray toward her cubs with her nose. The gesture made me smile involuntarily. She prioritized her cubs over herself. As time passed, I saw life returning to the two cubs. The first cub began tottering around the room, occasionally stumbling, but always trying to stand again. The second cub, though weaker, started to move slightly. The mother bear stayed put, her eyes never leaving her cubs, but occasionally she glanced at me through the glass. It felt as if she was trying to decide whether I was still a threat. I leaned back in my chair, letting out a sigh of relief. My plan was working, and that was all that mattered. But I knew this wasn't over. The storm outside could last another day, and I needed to ensure this bear family remained safe until they could return to the wild. Throughout the morning, I kept a close watch on the bear family. I adjusted the heater to maintain a stable temperature in the room and brought in more food and water every few hours. The mother bear gradually grew accustomed to my presence. Her wary gaze softened, replaced by something else, a fragile but unmistakable trust. Outside, the blizzard continued its relentless assault, but inside the storage room, life had been rekindled. The faint movements of the cubs and the resilience of the mother bear filled me with hope. I knew I had taken a significant risk bringing them in, but seeing them begin to recover, I felt no regret. I knew in my heart that I had done the right thing. I had stayed awake almost the entire night, my eyes fixed on the glass window, watching the bear family. The two cubs were now moving more, though still feeble. They tried to stand, took a few steps around the storage room, and then crawled back to their mother for warmth. The mother bear remained there, her large body shielding her cubs from the lingering cold. Her gaze seemed to soften, no longer as tense and wary as before. When the first light of dawn crept through the cabin's cracks, I looked outside and realized that the snowstorm showed no signs of letting up. Strong gusts of wind shook the cabin, and snow piled up against the windows, leaving only a faint glow of light visible from outside. I knew I had to keep the warmth going and continue caring for the bear family if they were to survive another day. I headed to the kitchen, preparing some dry food and warm water to bring to them. This time, I didn't open the door immediately, but stood outside the storage room, waiting a moment to ensure the mother bear was accustomed to my presence. I knocked lightly on the door, a seemingly unnecessary gesture, but it felt right to avoid startling her. Then I slowly opened the door, keeping my eyes focused on the mother bear. She lifted her head and stared directly at me, but this time there was no defensive posture or any sign of threat. I placed the tray of food and water near the door and then stepped back slowly. "I won't hurt you," I murmured, partly to reassure her and partly to calm myself. From a distance, I watched as the mother bear approached the tray. She carefully sniffed everything before gently nudging the warm water toward her cubs with her large nose. I was surprised to see her not eat immediately, but instead let her cubs eat first. It was an act I had observed in many other mother animals during previous research trips, but witnessing it in this dire situation moved me more deeply than ever. As time passed, I saw the two cubs growing stronger. One of them, the larger cub, had begun walking around the storage room. Its tiny legs were still shaky, but every step reflected the life slowly returning to it. The other cub, weaker, also started trying to stand and nuzzled its mother. I watched this scene with an inexplicable sense of relief. Perhaps I was witnessing a small miracle amidst this relentless storm. The mother bear spent most of her time lying still, occasionally glancing at me through the glass. I noticed her gaze no longer carried fear or panic. Instead, it was a gentle look, almost as if it held gratitude. I wondered if she understood that I wasn't a threat, but the one person helping her and her cubs through this difficult time. By mid-afternoon, the snowstorm began to subside. The wind no longer howled around the cabin, and the temperature rose slightly. Through the window, I saw the sky brighten, and clumps of snow started falling from the trees, leaving behind bare branches glistening under the faint light. I knew the storm was nearing its end, but I also understood that the bear family needed more time to fully recover before returning to the forest. I decided to spend the rest of the afternoon preparing for their departure. I cleared out most of the items in the storage room to create more space, ensuring nothing would obstruct the mother bear when she decided to leave with her cubs. I also checked the outer door to make sure that when it opened, it would provide a safe path leading into the forest. Throughout this process, I was careful not to make loud noises or do anything that might unsettle the mother bear. Evening came, and the atmosphere in the cabin grew unusually quiet. I sat by the window, looking into the storage room where the bear family was huddled together. They had made it through a harsh day, and I felt grateful to have played a part in it. The larger cub could now stand firmly, its legs steadier, while the smaller one slept soundly beside its mother. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the exhaustion in every part of my body. I had done everything I could to help them. Now, all that remained was to wait for the right moment for the bear family to return to the wild. I didn't know if they would remember me, but I knew this memory would stay with me forever. When the first light of morning filtered through the crack in the door, I knew the storm had passed. I pulled back the curtain, looked outside, and saw a completely different scene. Snow blanketed everything in white, but the sky was now clear and peaceful. The howling winds that had once rattled the cabin were gone, leaving only the stillness of a morning after the storm. I stepped to the small window overlooking the storage room. The bear family was still curled up together, but I noticed that the mother bear was awake. She raised her head, her ears twitching slightly, as if sensing the changes in the outside world. The two cubs remained nestled beside her, their breathing much calmer than on the first night they were brought in. I decided to open the storage room door to let fresh air in. Before doing so, I prepared some food and water, placing them in a far corner to ensure the mother bear could take them without feeling threatened. As the door opened, sunlight poured in. I saw the mother bear blink, then slowly lift her head to look outside. She stood, shook herself to dislodge the remnants of snow clinging to her fur, then turned to her cubs. The two cubs slowly woke up. They whimpered softly before taking small, tentative steps closer to their mother. I stepped back, keeping a safe distance, observing without interfering. The mother bear was in no hurry. She stood at the doorway of the storage room, her nose pointed toward the sky, as if to ensure no danger lingered. After a few moments, she bent down and gently nudged her cubs, signaling that it was time to leave. I retreated toward the cabin to avoid pressuring her. From a distance, I watched the mother bear lead her cubs out of the storage room. The cubs stayed close, their steps still a bit wobbly, but clearly stronger than when I first saw them during the storm. They moved slowly across the soft snow, leaving small paw prints that followed the larger ones left by their mother. After a few steps, the mother bear stopped. She turned her head and looked in my direction, her gaze calm but profound. I stood still, meeting her eyes, feeling an inexplicable connection between two different species. In that moment, there was no fear, no barriers, only understanding. I couldn't tell what she was thinking, but I wanted to believe it was a silent thank you. After a while, the mother bear turned back, resuming her path toward the forest with her cubs in tow. I stood there, watching every step until their silhouettes faded behind the trees. That sight left me with an indescribable feeling, a mix of relief and overwhelming emotion. I had done everything I could to help them, and now they were returning to where they belonged. Back in the cabin, I sat in a chair by the window, my eyes still gazing toward the forest. I wondered if I would ever see that bear family again. But I knew the answer didn't matter. What mattered was that they had a chance to continue living, and I had played my part in that fragile moment. Later, whenever I thought back to that stormy night, I always remembered the mother bear's gaze as she looked at me one last time. It wasn't just the gaze of a wild animal. It was a profound reminder of the connection between humans and nature. I hadn't taken a single photograph during that time. My camera had remained untouched on the table because I knew that some memories are best preserved in the heart, not through a lens. I took a deep breath, savoring the fresh air after the storm, and smiled. I knew that even as my life continued with research and observing wildlife from afar, this experience would remain a special part of my journey. It was a lesson not just about science, but about compassion and the courage to overcome fear to protect life.